Omar had always dreamed of owning a house with a backyard full of life. When he finally bought his small home on the edge of a quiet neighborhood, he knew what made it truly special. Behind the house stood a row of tall trees. They were strong, green, and older than many of the homes in the area. Omar loved those trees more than anything else on his property. In the morning, the leaves would sway in the soft wind, making a gentle sound like whispers. Birds built nests there, and their chirping became the music of his mornings. During the hot summer days, the shade from the trees kept his backyard cool and pleasant. In winter, the bare branches still looked beautiful, their shapes like art against the pale sky. For Omar, these trees were more than just part of the land. They were living things he had promised himself to protect. He often spent time sitting under them, sipping tea or reading a book. Sometimes, when his friends visited, they would sit in the backyard and talk for hours under the natural canopy. It was a Saturday afternoon when the first sign of trouble appeared. Omar had been at the market in the nearby town, buying vegetables and bread. The streets were busy, and he stayed longer than planned. The sun was starting to drop lower in the sky when he drove back into his neighborhood. As he turned the corner toward his house, something felt wrong. He could not see the tall green tops of his trees in the distance. At first, he thought it was just his imagination. But when he pulled into his driveway and stepped out of the car, his heart sank. The trees were gone. Every single one of them had been cut down. In their place were short, rough stumps sticking out from the ground. The smell of fresh wood was in the air, and bits of sawdust were still scattered across the grass. Omar stood frozen, staring at the empty space where the trees had been. It felt like part of his home had been stolen. He walked slowly to the backyard, hoping maybe it was a mistake, that he was only seeing part of it. But no, the entire row was gone. His neighbor, Mrs. Lena, was standing on the sidewalk near the fence. She looked worried and held a cup of tea in her hand. "Omar," she called softly, "I'm so sorry. They came this morning while you were out. The people from the Homeowners Association. They brought workers with chainsaws and trucks. They said the trees were blocking the view for the new houses." Omar turned to her, confused. "Blocking the view? These trees have been here for decades, and they're on my property?" Mrs. Lena nodded sadly. No, I tried to tell them, but they said it was already decided." Omar's chest tightened. He walked back toward the house, his mind racing. The HOA had rules about how houses should look, about paint colors and fence heights, but nothing about his trees. They had never sent him a letter or asked for his permission. Determined to get answers, Omar went to the HOA office the next morning. It was in a small building near the center of the neighborhood. Inside, the walls were covered with smiling photographs of community improvements, new street lamps, flowers in the park, and freshly painted fences. The HOA president, Mr. Grant, sat behind a wide desk. He was a tall man with silver hair and a smile that didn't seem warm at all. "Omar," he said as if he were greeting an old friend, "what can I do for you today?" "You can explain why my trees are gone," Omar replied firmly. "They were on my land. No one asked me. Who gave permission to remove them?" Mr. Grant leaned back in his chair, still smiling. "The decision was made in the best interest of the community. Those trees blocked the scenic view for several new homes. People paid for that view. The board voted, and the work was done." Omar clenched his hands at his sides. "You had no right. Those trees were healthy. They were part of my property. The community's appearance is more important," Mr. Grant said calmly, as if explaining something simple to a child. "You should be proud that your property was chosen to improve the neighborhood." Omar stared at him in disbelief. "Improve? You destroyed something that took decades to grow. You took it without permission." Mr. Grant gave a small shrug. "It's done now. No point in dwelling on it. Enjoy your new open view." Omar left the office without another word. Outside, the morning sun was bright, but his mood was dark. He walked home slowly, passing the empty space where the trees had stood. Without them, his backyard felt bare and exposed. The birds were gone. The shade was gone. And so was the peace those trees had brought him. That night, Omar sat at his kitchen table, looking at old photographs of the yard. In every picture, the trees were there, green, tall, and full of life. The more he looked at them, the more he felt a burning sense of injustice. The HOA had acted as if they owned everything. But they didn't. They had crossed a line. Omar was not a man who liked fights or arguments. He preferred quiet and peace. But some things were too important to ignore. These trees had been his responsibility, and they had been taken from him without reason. By the time the clock reached midnight, his decision was made. He would not let this go. The HOA might have more money and more influence, but they had broken the law. Omar would find a way to make them answer for it. He didn't know yet how long it would take or how difficult it would be, but deep down, he was certain of one thing. The HOA had made a mistake by thinking he would stay silent. The next morning, Omar woke early. The sunlight spilled into his kitchen, but he barely noticed it. His mind was full of thoughts about the trees and the injustice he had suffered. He knew the Homeowners Association had money and influence, but he also knew the law was on his side. Property rights were clear, and the trees had been on his land. Omar brewed a cup of tea and sat by the window, staring at the empty backyard. He thought about every afternoon he had spent under those trees. He remembered the laughter of friends, the songs of birds, and the calm evenings watching the sunset behind the branches. Those memories made him more determined. He would not give up. He picked up his laptop and started researching. He read about property laws, homeowners' rights, and past cases where HOA letters had overstepped their authority. Every story he read strengthened his resolve. He discovered that many people had won lawsuits against associations that had tried to take control of personal property. The process was long and difficult, but it was possible. Omar made a list of what he needed. He needed proof that the trees were on his property. He needed photographs, old receipts, and any evidence of maintenance or planting. He also needed witnesses who could testify that the trees had been his for years. He already had Mrs. Lena, and she was willing to help. He decided to hire a lawyer. Omar did not have much experience with legal matters, but he knew that professional guidance was essential. After several calls, he found a lawyer named Mr. Alvarez, a man known for handling property disputes. Omar explained the situation in detail, and Mr. Alvarez listened carefully, nodding as he took notes. "This is serious," Mr. Alvarez said finally. "The HOA cannot remove trees on someone's property without permission. You have a strong case if we can show clear proof that they belong to you. We may be able to recover damages and even take control of any land that was unfairly claimed by the HOA. Omar felt a surge of hope. For the first time since the trees were cut, he felt like there was a chance for justice. "What should we do first?" he asked. "Gather everything," Mr. Alvarez replied. "Photographs, old documents, neighbor statements. We will need a clear timeline showing ownership and care. Once we have that, we can file a formal complaint and start the legal process." Over the next few days, Omar worked tirelessly. He dug out old photographs from boxes, scanned them, and labeled every tree in each image. He collected water bills that showed he had watered the trees, receipts for fertilizer, and notes from gardeners who had helped care for them. He even found letters he had written to previous HOA boards about tree maintenance. Mrs. Lena and several other neighbors agreed to provide statements. They remembered the trees vividly and could testify that they had always belonged to Omar's property. They had seen him planting new trees years ago and taking care of the older ones. Their support strengthened Omar's case. Omar also measured the land carefully. He marked the exact location of every tree, comparing it with the official property maps. The maps confirmed that the trees were well within his boundary. Every detail he collected seemed to build a stronger shield around his rights. Meanwhile, the HOA continued their work on the empty land. They planted flowers and small shrubs, trying to make it look like a planned improvement. Omar walked past the backyard every morning, studying their changes. He did not allow himself to be distracted by their actions. He focused on the evidence he needed, not on the frustration of seeing the land altered. One evening, Omar and Mr. Alvarez met to review everything. The lawyers spread out photographs, maps, receipts, and witness statements on the table. "This is a solid case," he said. "We can demand compensation for the trees, for the emotional distress, and even for the land that was used without your permission. It will take time, but the law is on your side." Omar nodded, feeling both relief and anticipation. "How long do you think it will take?" "Legal battles like this are never short," Mr. Alvarez said. "It could take months, maybe longer, but patience and careful planning will win. The key is to stay organized and keep records of everything." Omar agreed. He began documenting every interaction with the HOA, every phone call, every letter, and every visit was recorded. He even kept notes about how the empty backyard affected his daily life. The missing trees were more than just property. They had been part of his happiness. As the weeks passed, Omar became more confident. He continued his daily routine, but with a new purpose. Every morning, he walked around his property, noting changes and maintaining evidence. Every evening, he reviewed documents and photographs with Mr. Alvarez. The process was exhausting, but Omar knew that it was worth it. One day, Omar received a call from Mr. Alvarez. "The HOA has responded to our initial complaint," the lawyer said. "They are denying any wrongdoing and claiming the removal was legal. They have lawyers ready to fight this. This means we have to prepare for a formal court case." Omar listened carefully, feeling the weight of the challenge. He had known it would not be easy. "What do we do next?" he asked. "We gather more evidence," Mr. Alvarez replied. "We make sure everything is complete. We will also hire an expert to estimate the value of the trees and the damage caused. That will help us ask for fair compensation. Then we file the case and let the court decide." Omar felt determined. He looked out the window at the empty backyard and imagined the trees standing tall again. It was more than imagination. It was a goal. The thought of justice fueled him. He knew the fight would be long, but he was ready. That night, Omar sat under the stars in the empty backyard. The ground felt bare under his feet, but in his mind, the trees grew tall once more. He imagined their leaves swaying, birds singing, and sunlight filtering through the branches. This vision kept him focused and reminded him why he was fighting. Omar knew that winning was not just about the land or the trees. It was about standing up for what was right. The HOA had believed they could act without consequences. Omar would prove them wrong. He would fight for his trees, for his property, and for the principle that no one could take what belonged to someone else without permission. And so, with determination in his heart and a plan forming in his mind, Omar prepared for the long road ahead. The battle had begun, and he would not rest until justice was served. The day Omar filed his lawsuit felt like the first step in a long journey. He arrived at the courthouse early, the sun just beginning to rise over the city streets. The building was tall and solid, with wide steps leading to large doors. Omar could feel the weight of the moment. This was more than just a case about trees. It was about fairness and standing up to power. Inside, the air smelled of paper and polish. People walked quickly through the hallways, carrying files and talking in low voices. Omar followed Mr. Alvarez, who guided him to a small office where they would meet the judge for the first hearing. The judge, a kind-looking woman named Judge Medina, listened carefully as Mr. Alvarez explained the situation. "Your Honor, the trees in question were on Mr. Omar's property for decades. The HOA removed them without his consent, claiming it was for community views. We are seeking damages in recognition of property rights." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "I understand," she said. "We will schedule a hearing and request that both parties provide evidence. I expect all documentation, photographs, and witness statements to be submitted on time. This case will require careful consideration." Omar felt a mix of nerves and determination. He knew the fight was only beginning. Outside the courthouse, he looked at the city streets and took a deep breath. He had to prepare for what would come next. Back at home, Omar continued organizing his evidence. He reviewed photographs, carefully labeling every image and noting dates. He made a timeline showing when each tree had been planted and cared for. He also wrote down the names of neighbors who could testify about the trees. Every detail mattered. The HOA, aware of the lawsuit, started its own preparation. Omar noticed trucks near his property, taking measurements and marking the ground. They seemed determined to show that their removal of the trees was justified. Omar watched silently, knowing he had to stay focused. He could not let anger control him. One afternoon, Mr. Alvarez introduced Omar to an expert in landscaping and tree valuation. The expert, Mr. Patel, examined the property, measuring stumps and noting the type of trees that had been removed. These were mature trees, Mr. Patel said. They had significant value, not just financially, but also for the environment and the neighborhood's ecosystem. Their removal without consent is a serious matter. Omar felt a sense of reassurance. He was building a strong case, and the expert's report would help show the true impact of the HOA's actions. As weeks passed, the courtroom calendar became part of Omar's life. Each day, he prepared for hearings, met with Mr. Alvarez, and reviewed evidence. He spoke to neighbors who provided statements, describing how they had seen Omar care for the trees over the years. Mrs. Lena remembered the exact day Omar planted a new tree and recalled how he had watered it every week. Their support strengthened his resolve. Omar also learned more about the HOA's rules and past decisions. He discovered that similar cases had occurred before, where the association had acted without permission. Some had been resolved in favor of homeowners, others had ended in lengthy battles. This knowledge gave Omar confidence, but also reminded him that the fight would not be easy. One morning, a letter arrived from the HOA's lawyer. It was formal, with sharp edges and official stamps. The lawyer denied any wrongdoing and claimed the removal of the trees was within the HOA's authority. They argued that the new house's views justified the action. Omar read the letter carefully, feeling a spark of frustration but also clarity. He would not respond with anger. Instead, he added the letter to his growing collection of documents and noted it for the court. Every action the HOA took became part of the record. In preparation for the hearing, Mr. Alvarez advised Omar on how to present himself. Stay calm, speak clearly, and stick to the facts, he said. The judge wants evidence and reason, not emotion. Show that this is about fairness, property rights, and the impact of their actions. Omar practiced at home, explaining the situation as if telling a story. He described the trees, the shade they provided, the birds, and the way they had been part of his life. He talked about the moment he discovered the trees were gone and the steps he had taken since then. Speaking aloud helped him feel ready. The day of the first hearing arrived. Omar walked into the courtroom with Mr. Alvarez, his heart beating fast. The judge entered, and the room became quiet. The whole representatives were there, confident and formal. Omar focused on the facts he had prepared. When it was his turn to speak, Omar stood tall. He told the story clearly, describing each tree and the care he had given them. He presented photographs, maps, and receipts. He called witnesses who spoke about seeing him maintain the trees and about their removal. Every detail added weight to his case. The HOA argued back, emphasizing the community's needs and claiming that their actions were part of planned improvements. Omar listened quietly, taking notes and waiting for his turn to respond. He did not interrupt or argue. He simply presented the truth and relied on the evidence he had gathered. Judge Medina took careful notes and asked questions about property, boundaries, the timeline of events, and the expert report from Mr. Patel. Omar answered each question clearly and calmly. He focused on what was real, on what he could prove, and on the fairness of the situation. After the hearing, Omar felt a mix of relief and anticipation. The judge had not made a decision yet, but she had listened to the evidence and seemed to understand the situation. Omar knew the battle was far from over, but he also knew he had made the first strong step back home. He looked at the empty backyard again. The stumps were still there, but in his mind, he imagined the trees standing tall. The fight was not just for himself. It was for neighbors who had seen injustice and for the principle that no one could take property without permission. Omar also noticed small changes in the neighborhood. Some neighbors now spoke quietly about the HOA's decisions, expressing surprise that they could act without consulting homeowners. Omar realized that his fight might inspire others to stand up for their rights as well. Each day, Omar continued preparing. He wrote down notes, collected additional evidence, and maintained his property. He knew that winning the case would not be simple, but he also understood that careful preparation and patience could lead to success. By the end of the month, the courtroom hearings had become part of Omar's routine. Each meeting strengthened his case and increased his confidence. The fight was challenging, but Omar was determined. He refused to let fear or frustration take over. He would stand firm, and he would show that justice was possible even against powerful opponents. Omar thought he was ready for every challenge. He had collected evidence, spoken to witnesses, and prepared carefully with Mr. Alvarez. But as the next hearing approached, he began to realize that the battle was bigger than he had imagined. The HOA was determined to fight back with all its resources, and Omar had to be careful. On a bright Monday morning, Omar arrived at the courthouse early. The hallways were busy with people going in and out of courtrooms. He felt a mixture of nerves and determination. He had done everything he could to prepare, but the unexpected was always possible. In legal battles, inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. The HOA lawyers had arrived, carrying thick files and laptops. They looked confident and ready to challenge every claim Omar had made. Omar focused on staying calm. He reminded himself that truth and evidence were stronger than confidence without proof. The judge, Judge Medina, entered the room, and everyone rose. Omar felt a slight chill in his stomach, but steadied himself. The first surprise came immediately. The HOA had brought their own expert, a man named Mr. Callan, who claimed that the trees had been hazardous and that their removal was necessary for safety. Mr. Callan presented diagrams and reports showing that some branches might have fallen in storms and suggested that the trees were too close to the new houses. Omar listened carefully, trying not to let panic rise. He knew the claim was exaggerated. The trees had been healthy for decades, and no neighbor had ever complained about danger. Alvarez stood beside Omar and whispered, "We expected this. Stay calm. Our expert's report will counter these claims. We will show the trees were valuable, not dangerous." When it was Omar's turn, he spoke clearly and confidently. He explained that he had regularly inspected and maintained the trees. He had removed weak branches and hired gardeners to ensure they were healthy. He presented photographs showing the trees standing strong during past storms. Witnesses confirmed that they had never observed unsafe conditions. Judge Medina listened carefully, asking questions about the measurements, maintenance, and expert reports. Omar answered each question honestly, focusing on facts rather than emotion. He knew that staying composed was essential to winning. The hearing lasted several hours. The HOA continued to challenge the evidence, pointing to minor imperfections in Omar's photographs and documents. Each time, Omar and Mr. Alvarez calmly explained the context, showing that the evidence clearly supported his case. Despite the challenges, Omar felt confident by the end of the day. He knew the fight was not over, but he had defended his claim successfully so far. He left the courthouse with a sense of purpose, ready to face the next steps. Back home, Omar reviewed the day's events. He realized that the HOA would not give up easily. They had resources, connections, and lawyers who knew the system well. Omar understood that winning required patience, strategy, and careful attention to every detail. Over the next few weeks, new challenges appeared. The HOA sent letters to neighbors, asking them to speak against Omar's claims. Some neighbors were hesitant, afraid of conflicts with the association. Omar spoke gently to each of them, explaining the importance of honesty and fairness. Gradually, most neighbors agreed to support him. Their statements became part of the growing evidence file. Omar also noticed small acts of interference. Workers from the HOA appeared near his property, Measuring and photographing the land, they seemed to be trying to find reasons to challenge his case. Omar stayed calm, documenting everything, every visit, every action. Became part of the record. One evening, Omar and Mr. Alvarez met to discuss strategy. "They are trying to intimidate you," Mr. Alvarez said. "We must continue collecting evidence and keep records of all interactions. This will show the court that their actions were aggressive and unjustified." Omar nodded. He understood. That patience was crucial. "We will not respond with anger," he said. "We will respond with facts." The next challenge came in the form of an unexpected hearing delay. The court scheduled a new date because the HOA requested more time to prepare. Omar felt frustrated at first. The delay meant waiting longer for justice. But he also saw an opportunity. The extra time allowed him to gather additional evidence and strengthen his case. During this time, Omar found new photographs from previous homeowners showing the trees growing over decades. He discovered letters from local gardeners describing the care he had given to each tree. These documents added weight to his claim. Omar realized that even unexpected challenges could be turned into advantages with careful planning. On the morning of the rescheduled hearing, Omar walked into the courtroom with renewed confidence. He had reviewed every document, every photograph, and every statement. He knew the importance of presenting a clear and organized case. The HOA again tried to argue that the trees were dangerous and that the removal was legal. Omar and Mr. Alvarez countered with expert reports, photographs, and detailed explanations of maintenance. Witnesses confirmed that the trees had been healthy and well cared for. The court listened carefully, asking questions to ensure all evidence was clear. Throughout the hearing, Omar remained calm. He focused on the facts, never letting frustration or anger show. His preparation and patience were paying off. Each question from the judge gave him a chance to demonstrate the truth and show that the HOA's actions had been unfair. After several hours, the hearing concluded. Judge Medina said she would review all evidence carefully before making a decision. Omar left the courthouse feeling tired but determined. He knew that the fight was far from over, but he also knew that he had done everything possible to defend his property and his rights. Back at home, Omar walked through his empty backyard. The stumps of the trees remained, but he imagined them growing tall again. Each challenge he faced strengthened his resolve. The battle was difficult, but he was learning patience, strategy, and the power of evidence. Omar also began to feel a sense of support from the community. Neighbors quietly expressed admiration for his determination. Some shared stories of their own experiences with the HOA, and Omar realized that his fight might help others stand up for fairness in the future. Every day, Omar continued preparing, documenting, and learning. He knew that winning would not be simple, but he also knew that truth and justice were stronger than intimidation and power. The fight was challenging, but he refused to give up. By the end of the month, Omar had turned the challenges into lessons. Each delay, each objection, and each attempt to intimidate him had strengthened his case. He was more organized, more confident, and more determined than ever. Omar understood that the battle for his trees was not just about property. It was about standing up for what was right, about showing that fairness and honesty mattered. The HOA had made a mistake by assuming he would stay silent. Omar was ready for whatever came next. And so, with patience, strategy, and determination, Omar prepared for the next stage of the legal battle, knowing that justice was not easy, but it was worth fighting for. Omar felt the weight of every day in the courtroom. Weeks had passed since the last hearing, and the fight had taken a toll on his mind and energy. He had stayed organized, calm, and patient, but the HOA's constant challenges had been exhausting. Still, Omar refused to give up. Every time he looked at the empty stumps in his backyard, he reminded himself of what he was fighting for. One morning, Omar received a call from Mr. Alvarez. His voice was calm but carried a hint of excitement. "Omar, I have news. I found something that can change the course of this case. You may want to come to the office immediately." Omar felt a surge of curiosity and hope. He left home quickly and arrived at the lawyer's office. Mr. Alvarez led him to a small conference room and spread documents across the table. "I was reviewing historical property records," Mr. Alvarez said. "We discovered that the land the HOA claimed as part of the community project is actually part of your property. It was never legally transferred. This changes everything." Omar stared at the papers. His heart raced. For months, he had fought to prove the trees belonged to him. And now there was proof that the HOA had overstepped in more ways than he realized. "This means we can claim not only damages, but also ownership of the land," Omar said, his voice steady but excited. "Yes," Mr. Alvarez confirmed. "We will present this to the court as evidence. It strengthens your position tremendously. The HOA cannot claim authority over land that legally belongs to you." Omar spent the rest of the day organizing the new evidence. He added property maps, old deeds, and photographs showing the boundaries clearly. He also prepared statements from neighbors who had watched him care for the trees and knew the land had always been his. Each piece made the case stronger. The next hearing arrived, and Omar felt a mix of nerves and anticipation. He knew this could be the turning point. As he entered the courtroom, he noticed the HOA representatives looking more serious than before. They sensed the shift in the case. Judge Medina began the hearing by reviewing the evidence submitted by both parties. Mr. Alvarez presented the new property records and explained how the HOA had overstepped its authority. "Your Honor, the land in question has always been part of Mr. Omar's property. The HOA acted without legal rights to remove the trees and alter the land," he said. The HOA lawyers argued again, but this time their claims seemed weaker. Omar remained calm, knowing that the new evidence spoke louder than any argument they could make. He presented the photographs and maps showing the clear property boundaries. Witnesses confirmed the historical ownership and maintenance of the trees. Judge Medina listened carefully, asking questions about the deeds and maps. Omar answered clearly and confidently. He explained how he had cared for the trees, documented every action, and maintained the land over decades. Every detail supported his claim and countered the HOA's arguments. During the hearing, Omar noticed something unexpected. Some neighbors had come to watch the proceedings. They whispered words of encouragement as he walked past. Omar realized that his fight was not only for himself, but for the community. People admired his determination and honesty. His courage inspired others to stand up for fairness in their own lives. By the end of the day, the judge scheduled a special review session to examine the new evidence in detail. Omar left the courthouse feeling both tired and hopeful. The momentum had shifted, and he knew the outcome could finally move in his favor. Over the next few weeks, Omar continued preparing for the final review. He reviewed every document, updated photographs, and collected additional statements from neighbors. He also consulted Mr. Patel, the tree expert, to ensure that the valuation of the trees and the land was accurate and clear. Omar learned more about the value of the trees, not just financially but also environmentally. They provided shade, improved air quality, and created habitats for birds and small animals. Their removal had affected the backyard, the neighborhood, and the quality of life in ways that money alone could not measure. Finally, the day of the special review arrived. The courtroom was quiet and serious. Judge Medina examined every piece of evidence carefully. The HOA lawyers tried to argue, but the historical property records and witness statements were undeniable. Omar presented his documentation calmly, focusing on facts and truth. During the session, the judge asked the HOA representatives if they had any legal documentation showing ownership of the land or permission to remove the trees. The lawyers could not provide any. Their authority to act had been based on assumptions, not legal rights. Omar felt a wave of relief. The truth was clear, and the law was on his side. Judge Medina then turned to Omar. "Mr. Omar, you have presented strong evidence that the trees and the land belong to you. The court recognizes your property rights and will consider damages for the removal of the trees and alterations made by the HOA." Omar's heart pounded with excitement. Months of effort, patience, and preparation had led to this moment. He had fought not with anger, but with determination, organization, and truth. The trees he loved so much might be gone, but the law had recognized his rights and the value of his property. Over the next few days, the court finalized the decision. Omar was awarded ownership of the land that the HOA had tried to claim. He also received compensation for the trees, damages, and emotional distress caused by the unlawful removal. The amount was significant, enough to rebuild, restore, and protect the property for the future. Omar felt a sense of relief mixed with joy. He had faced a powerful organization and stood firm. The community supported him, and justice had been served. More than money or land, Omar had proven that fairness, honesty, and determination could overcome intimidation and injustice. Back in his backyard, Omar walked among the stumps of the trees, imagining them growing tall again. He knew he could plant new trees, restore the shade, and bring life back to the land he loved. The fight had been long and difficult, but it had also taught him resilience, patience, and the power of standing up for what was right. Neighbors came to congratulate him, sharing smiles, handshakes, and words of encouragement. Some spoke about how Omar's courage had inspired them to take action in their own lives. Omar realized that his battle had not only protected his property, but had also strengthened the community's sense of fairness and justice. As he walked through the empty yard that afternoon, Omar felt hope for the future. He had won more than a legal battle. He had shown that even ordinary people could challenge unfair systems and succeed. The memory of the old trees remained in his heart, and now he had the chance to create new ones, stronger and protected by the law. Omar knew the journey was not over. There would be work to rebuild, plant new trees, and maintain the land, but he felt ready. The lessons he had learned would guide him, and the support of the community reminded him that he was not alone. For the first time in months, Omar allowed himself to relax. The fight had been long, the challenges many, but justice had finally been served, and as he stood in his backyard, looking at the open sky, he imagined the trees growing tall once more, a symbol of persistence, fairness, and hope for the future. Omar woke up early that morning with a sense of purpose. The long legal battle had ended in his favor, and the victory gave him not just relief, but also a clear responsibility. His backyard was empty, but he could see the possibilities. The stumps of the old trees were reminders of what had been lost, and Omar knew it was time to restore his land to its former beauty. He called a local nursery and began planning. He wanted to plant new trees, ones that would grow strong and healthy, and eventually provide shade, homes for birds, and beauty to the backyard. Omar also ordered shrubs and flowers to make the yard lively and welcoming. Each plant was chosen carefully, considering sunlight, soil type, and long-term growth. While waiting for the trees to arrive, Omar spent time preparing the land. He removed old stumps, cleared debris, and enriched the soil with compost and fertilizer. Neighbors watched from their yards, some offering advice, others quietly appreciating his determination. Mrs. Lena came over frequently, helping Omar plan the layout and share memories of the old trees. Omar felt a sense of calm and satisfaction in working with his hands. Every scoop of soil, every planting decision reminded him why he had fought for this land. The backyard was more than property. It was a place of peace, connection, and life. When the new trees were delivered, Omar carefully planted each one, measuring distances and ensuring they would have room to grow tall. He felt a mix of emotions, sadness for the old trees, joy for the new life, and hope for the future. As he watered the new plants, he imagined the birds returning, the shade forming, and the yard becoming a sanctuary once again. Neighbors began to take notice. Some came to offer help, carrying tools and bags of soil. Others brought plants to add to the garden. Omar realized that his fight had inspired more than respect. It had created a sense of community. People wanted to see the yard thrive, and Omar welcomed their support. Over the weeks, the backyard began to change. Small leaves appeared on the young trees, and flowers brightened the corners of the yard. Omar carefully recorded each step of the restoration. knowing that documenting the growth of the new plants was part of celebrating his victory. The land that had been stripped and challenged was now alive with new life and energy. Omar also took steps to ensure the HOA could never interfere again. He updated property boundaries, installed clear markers, and informed the neighbors of the legal decision. He wanted to protect the land he had fought so hard for. The process of rebuilding and securing the property gave Omar a sense of accomplishment and peace. One afternoon, Omar noticed a young bird perched on a newly planted tree. It chirped cheerfully as if welcoming the changes. He smiled and realized that the life he had fought to protect was already returning. The backyard was no longer empty. It was alive again, full of hope, energy, and promise. As the weeks turned into months, Omar continued to care for the garden. He watered the plants, trimmed branches, and nurtured the soil. He also spent time with neighbors, sharing tips, stories, and laughter. The backyard became a place not only for Omar but for the community, a space that reminded everyone of perseverance and justice. During this time, Omar received a letter from the HOA. It was formal and brief, acknowledging the court's decision and promising not to interfere in the future. Omar read it carefully, feeling a sense of closure. The association could no longer claim authority over his land, and the legal victory had secured his rights permanently. Omar spent quiet evenings in the backyard, watching the sunset behind the growing trees. He reflected on the journey. The fight had been long and difficult, filled with challenges, delays, and doubts. But it had also taught him resilience, patience, and the importance of standing up for what was right. Every moment of struggle had led to this point, and Omar felt grateful for the lessons he had learned. The children in the neighborhood began to play in Omar's yard, running among the flowers and newly planted trees. Their laughter reminded him of the joy the old trees had once brought. He watched them carefully, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. He had protected the land, restored life to it, and created a space for the next generation to enjoy. Omar also thought about the future. He planned to continue planting more trees, shrubs, and flowers each year. He wanted the backyard to grow into a place that would bring happiness for decades. Just like the old trees had done, every decision he made now was about creating lasting beauty, safety, and peace for the property and the community. One morning, Omar received a call from a local newspaper. A reporter wanted to write a story about his legal victory and how he had restored his backyard. Omar agreed, thinking that sharing his experience could help others. He spoke about the importance of standing up for fairness, the value of patience, and the joy of nurturing life. The article highlighted not just his legal victory, but also the positive changes he had brought to the community. As the months passed, Omar's backyard transformed. The new trees grew taller, their leaves creating shade and shelter. Birds returned, and the air felt fresher. Flowers bloomed, and shrubs added color and texture to the landscape. Every day, Omar walked through the yard with a sense of pride and happiness. Omar also reflected on the community support he had received. Neighbors who had helped with planting, shared advice, or offered encouragement had made the process richer. He realized that the fight had not only restored his land, but had strengthened relationships, creating a sense of unity and shared joy. By the end of the year, the backyard was almost unrecognizable from the day the trees had been cut. It was vibrant, alive, and welcoming. Omar looked at the yard and remembered the struggle, the patience, and the determination it had taken to reach this point. Every plant, every tree, every flower was a reminder of resilience and the power of standing up for what was right. Omar knew that the journey was ongoing. Trees would grow slowly, gardens required constant care, and life always brought new challenges. But he felt ready for anything. He had faced one of the toughest battles of his life, and he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined to protect what he loved. Sitting under the shade of a young tree one afternoon, Omar felt a deep sense of peace. The struggle for the trees and the land had taught him patience, courage, and the importance of fairness. He knew that the backyard would continue to grow, thrive, and bring joy for years to come. The empty stumps of the past had given way to life, hope, and beauty. Omar smiled, feeling grateful for every challenge, every victory, and every lesson. The backyard was no longer just land. It was a symbol of determination, justice, and the ability to create life from struggle. Omar had rebuilt more than trees. He had rebuilt his home, his happiness, and his hope for the future. Months had passed since Omar had won the legal battle against the HOA. The backyard, once empty and bare, had grown into a vibrant space filled with life, color, and promise. Young trees stretched toward the sky, flowers bloomed in neat rows, and birds had returned to make their homes among the branches. Omar often walked slowly through the yard, feeling pride and peace in every step. Even though the legal battle was over, Omar continued to care for the property with the same dedication he had shown. Throughout the fight, he watered the trees, trimmed branches, and nurtured the soil. He also worked to protect the land legally, updating property markers and ensuring boundaries were clear. Omar wanted to make sure that the HOA could never challenge his property again. One afternoon, as Omar worked in the yard, neighbors began arriving. Mrs. Lena brought a basket of freshly baked bread. Smiling warmly, others came with plants, flowers, and gardening tools. Omar realized that the struggle he had faced had strengthened relationships in the neighborhood. People had seen his dedication, patience, and fairness, and they wanted to be part of the restoration and celebration. Omar greeted everyone with a smile. Feeling grateful, "Thank you for helping," he said. "This backyard is not just mine anymore. It belongs to everyone who cares about it and wants it to thrive." The neighbors laughed and chatted, planting flowers together and clearing spaces for new shrubs. Children ran around the yard, playing games and exploring the growing trees. The sound of laughter, combined with the gentle rustling of leaves and the breeze, created a feeling of harmony and community. As the day continued, Omar reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He remembered the day he discovered the trees were gone, the frustration and sadness he had felt, and the long hours he had spent gathering evidence, meeting with his lawyer, and attending hearings. Every challenge had tested his patience, resolve, and courage. Yet, all the effort had been worth it. Omar also thought about the HOA. Their attempts to claim his land and remove the trees had been bold, but in the end, fairness had prevailed. The legal system had recognized the value of honesty, property rights, and persistence. Omar felt satisfaction not just in winning, but in knowing that justice had been served. Mr. Alvarez visited Omar that afternoon to see the restored backyard. "You have done an amazing job, Omar," he said, looking at the young trees and flowers. "The property is thriving, and the evidence shows that you care deeply for this land. Your patience and determination made this victory possible." Omar nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment. "It was a long journey," he said, "but I learned that standing up for what is right is always worth it. This backyard is proof of that." In the following weeks, Omar continued to expand and improve the property. He planted more trees, creating rows that would eventually provide shade and homes for birds. He added small benches and paths, turning the backyard into a welcoming space for family, friends, and neighbors. Each addition reminded him of the importance of patience and dedication. Omar also began sharing his experience with the community. He spoke to neighbors about property rights, the importance of documentation, and the value of standing up for fairness. People listened carefully, inspired by his story and determination. Many expressed admiration for his courage and promised to protect their own property rights. In the future, one sunny morning, Omar organized a small gathering to celebrate the restoration of the backyard. Neighbors, friends, and even children from the neighborhood came together to plant the last set of trees and flowers. There was laughter, storytelling, and shared joy. The yard, once a place of conflict and sadness, had become a symbol of perseverance, justice, and renewal. As the sun began to set, Omar stood under one of the young trees. Feeling the cool shade on his face, he looked around at the vibrant colors, the greenery, and the people he had come to respect and appreciate. The backyard was alive in a way he had never imagined possible after the trees had been destroyed. Omar also reflected on the personal growth he had experienced. The legal battle had tested his patience, courage, and focus. He had learned the value of preparation, documentation, and staying calm under pressure. He had discovered the strength that comes from persistence and the importance of standing for what is right, even when faced with powerful opposition. The children ran past him, chasing each other through the flowers and around the new trees. Their laughter filled the air, and Omar felt a sense of fulfillment. The property that had once been the center of conflict was now a space of joy, growth, and community. Every effort he had made, every challenge he had faced, had contributed to this outcome. Omar also knew that the victory was not just about the land or the trees. It was about resilience, hope, and the principle that fairness and honesty should guide actions. The restored backyard was a living example of what dedication and justice could achieve. Over time, the trees grew taller, their branches forming a canopy that shaded the yard. Birds nested in the branches, butterflies visited the flowers, and the neighborhood became a place where people gathered to enjoy the beauty Omar had fought to protect. The backyard became a landmark, a symbol of the power of standing up for what is right. One evening, as Omar sat on a bench under the tallest tree, he reflected on the journey from loss to restoration. The fight had been long and difficult, but it had led to something more meaningful than he had imagined. The land was his. The trees were returning, and the community around him had grown stronger. Omar smiled, thinking of the future. He planned to continue caring for the backyard, planting new trees each year, and sharing the space with neighbors and friends. The property was no longer just land. It was a symbol of hope, persistence, and the rewards of standing up for fairness. As the stars appeared in the sky, Omar felt a deep sense of peace. The battle had tested him, but he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined to protect what he loved. The backyard, once empty and bare, was now alive with beauty, life, and promise. Omar knew that challenges would continue in life, but he also knew that he could face them with patience, preparation, and courage. He had seen the power of truth, fairness, and persistence, and he would carry those lessons with him always. Finally, as the moonlight touched the new trees, Omar felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The land was restored, the property secured, and the backyard thriving. He had fought for what was right, overcome obstacles, and created something lasting. The journey from loss to renewal had ended with victory, and Omar's heart was full of hope, joy, and pride. The backyard, filled with growing trees, flowers, and the laughter of children, stood as a testament to his journey. Omar had reclaimed more than land. He had reclaimed peace, fairness, and the promise of the future. The story of the backyard was complete, and Omar knew that every effort he had made had been worth it.